Hello, travelers and tourists. My name is Mark, and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller on the quest to find some new vacation spots. And to help me with that journey, today I have brought a guest so we can discuss some of the most fascinating locations to travel to in the Golarion campaign setting. So, to go ahead and introduce my guest, Sir Vertigo, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your channel?
Hey guys, my name's Sir Vertigo. I do lore on pretty much everything Golarion. Locations, people, quests, anything you can think of, I'm attempting to talk about it on my channel.
Well, Sir Vertigo, it is wonderful to have you here today. To those of you who might be seeing this video first, there's actually going to be another video on Sir Vertigo's channel where I visit with him for a little bit, and these videos are kind of intended to go together. This video, we're going to be talking about some of our favorite locations in the Golarion setting, and then over on his channel, we're going to be talking about some of our favorite characters from the Golarion campaign setting. And I don't know exactly when both videos will be going up, but once both of those videos are up, I'll try to make sure that there are links in the video description and possibly up here on the screen somewhere as well. But that is the plan, and as I said, the goal here is just to talk about some of our favorite places in Golarion, and to set the stage for this, I've said several times on this channel, I think that Paizo has some of the best setting writers in the TTRPG industry. Sir Vertigo, would you agree with that?
Oh, easily. Some of their locations are so fleshed out that, to be honest, you could have an entire campaign in one nation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of other tabletop games that you could say that.
I remember hearing an interview of a couple of years ago where someone was talking about how they designed the Golarion setting, and they referred to it as the kitchen sink setting that doesn't suck. And I had a good laugh when they said that, but essentially they have created a world that can host so many different types of stories. But just to give you guys a little bit of heads up, we're not just necessarily sticking strictly to the Inner Sea region that is the main part of the Golarion setting. We may bounce around all over the place with the setting that Paizo has described. But enough preamble. Let's get into the list and talk about our favorite settings or locations in Golarion. And Sir Vertigo, kick us off with your number 5.
All right. Number 5, we're going about as far away physically from Golarion as you possibly can, and we're going to go to the last planet in the solar system, Aucturn the Stranger. Now, you don't normally see it from Golarion, but researchers and powerful wizards who have visited always depict it very differently from each other. It looks completely different depending on who goes there, which that's interesting enough. But it's the fact that it's not exactly a planet. It's actually a great old one floating out there in space. And as a huge fan of all things Cthulhu and just old god, that is amazingly cool to me. I've always wanted to do an adventure where we go out to Aucturn the Stranger, but I've never had a group that got high enough level to make it feasible.
Mm-hmm. I believe, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, I think Aucturn features at least slightly in the adventure path that they did when they were playtesting Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Do you know if that's correct or not, or am I making that up?
I didn't know that actually. I didn't get a chance to look at any of the playtest stuff before Pathfinder 2 came out. I had kind of falling out of the Pathfinder system for the most part then, and came back real hard when it officially dropped. So I didn't get a chance to check out any of the playtest stuff. I wish I had though, because that does sound really cool. I might see if I can find an old copy of that now.
To those of you watching, I will see if I can dig up my copy and maybe post some links or some comments or something. But I do think that Aucturn plays a role. I can't remember the specific details, but I do agree with you. I love the fact that Paizo just stuck a mythos monster floating through the solar system of Golarion. I think that is a hilarious inclusion.
Well, even as cool as just the setting itself is, some of the legends surrounding it are very cool. Some sources have said that it's how you travel to the dark places between worlds. So
Mm-hmm.
that would mean, for example, Zon Cathan would have had to travel through Aucturn somehow to get to wherever he went. And
Nice.
then there's just the actual locations on the planet, like the Loving Place is one that's listed, and basically it's got these gases that make you go into like an aphrodisiac state where all you want to do is mate. And that's such a weird concept for a great old one planet
Mm-hmm.
that I find it fascinating.
I know that there is a lot of interesting stuff about Aucturn in Starfinder, and I'm trying to separate what I know from Starfinder Aucturn and Pathfinder Aucturn. Um, but like, because I know that there's reference to a gate that is strongly implied to be a mythos gate of some kind in the Starfinder setting, and it's like I don't think that's Pathfinder official. So.
Regrettably, I've not touched on anything Starfinder yet. I really need to because it does look like such a fun setting. But there's just so much to cover in Pathfinder. I'm scared
Mhm.
to dip my toes in another pool right now.
Starfinder feels like the game that I keep neglecting, and I feel bad for neglecting it. Um, because like there is so much Pathfinder stuff, and then there's this other fun game over here that I never get to do anything with.
Yeah,
the
I truly feel like I'm never actually gonna get all of Golarion done sometimes, especially when this little planet that doesn't have that many adventures listed, like it's only got 10 sources on the wiki alone.
Mhm.
And there's a lot to cover just in that. So
Mhm. I guess the next question to ask is if a storyteller wanted to use Aucturn, what are some ways that they could use Aucturn, feature Aucturn as part of one of their games?
that's a good question. I would honestly have it probably start getting closer to Galarian, for example. Like, I know that every so often, I think it's like 50 something years, 55 years, the planet gets a little bit closer to Galarian and it starts making these huge sandstorms in Osirian.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have a lot of little effects like that getting worse and worse as the planet gets nearer, and you've got to perhaps find an artifact that sends it back into its correct position, or go through a newly discovered gate in Assyrian that teleports you there, or any number of things. It could wake up creatures on Golarion. There's a lot you could do with a living planet growing closer.
I agree. I think it is a natural fit for anything H.P. Lovecraft that you're thinking about doing with Pathfinder. I think it's just perfect for those kinds of stories. So.
Especially if it has the ability to make you see different things depending on who's there. That kind of implies that at the very basics, it's psychic. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it could really mess with people's mind just getting close to the planet. But
Well, is there any other special information you'd like to offer about Octurne, or are we ready for my number 5?
I think we're ready for yours.
Okay, well, I must admit, my number 5 is on the list because as a game master, I am contractually obligated by the Infernal Pact that I signed when I became a game master that I must Jurassic Park my players at some point in every campaign. If I'm not clever girling my players, I am doing it wrong as a storyteller. I fundamentally believe that. Therefore, my number 5 is the Mwangi Expanse. And for those of you who might not be familiar, the Mwangi Expanse is pretty much a massive jungle that exists on the continent of Garund. It's the southern part of the Inner Sea region, and the Mwangi Expanse is a portion of the Golarion setting that is so massive that it kind of runs off the main map, if you will. Um, and one of the things that I love about the Mwangi Expanse is the absolutely amazing variety of stories that you can tell there. Um, the joke at my table, as I've alluded to, is when we want to do a Welcome to Jurassic Park session, we go to the Mwangi Expanse, and there's a Triceratops or a T-Rex or a pack of raptors that's chasing the party. Um, that's just like one of the easy ones you can do, but that region is so large and comes with so many different groups and so many different story options that you can really dive into a ton of stuff. There is a crashed Shori Sky City in one portion of that setting. There is, I might be messing up the name of the deity. I think there's a city where a deity walks around, just walks around the city, and it basically serves as like a tyrant of the city. I believe his name is Volcana. Um,
Yes.
just there's so many different places that are kind of packed inside this region, and my personal favorite is the Magambaya Magical Academy that was founded by Old Mage Jatembe. I have seen the magic school done in so many different fantasy settings, stories, video games, movies, what have you. And the Magambaya is hands down my favorite. I think it's just the most interesting take on a magic school, and I love the House Scion magic that is associated with the Magambaya. Just every caster that I play wants to visit that school.
Yeah, they've got that whole region is so vast. There's so many cool legends packed into every little inch of that. Like, I particularly like the Cloud Spire dwarves that live there. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're super cool. They've got some of the really cool artwork from that source book.
Mm-hmm.
But the Mwangi Expanse art in itself is amazing. Like, it's so inspiring looking at some of these shots, like shots of the school, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or it's got shots of like Blood Cove that's
Mm-hmm.
over to the northwest, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. It might be off of my map though, but I love the Mwangi. That was one of the first 2E adventures my group did, and despite me, we were playing a Pathfinder game where they're members of the Pathfinder Society, and despite me trying to warn my players over and over that disease is rife in this area, they didn't do anything to try to fight that. So it ended up with my wife getting I'm wanting to say blood rot in her left arm.
Oh gosh.
And not only did she get this disease, they refused to treat it for days until it had spread up to her shoulder. So she decided that one of the other players would have to amputate her arm. And that became kind of like a cornerstone of her character, where she is this one-armed goblin rogue, and she went on to have a really long life with this character. I want to say we made it to level 11 with her having one arm from level like 2.
Oh, nice.
So, but she absolutely adores that goblin still.
Mm-hmm. My wife also has a bit of an attachment to the Mwangi Expanse, um, mostly for one of the unique ancestries that's associated with that region, which is the Anati, or the Spider Folk. I don't know
Yeah,
if you've seen any of those, but my,
yeah. I've got a player who's terrified of spiders, and I didn't think the Anati would bother her because that's obviously not a real spider, but just describing them had her kind of shivering, so we quickly moved out of their region just because she couldn't play with them.
um, I do not like spiders, and my wife loves spiders, and so she constantly threatens to play in Anati just to annoy me as the storyteller. So, um, but one of the things that I really like about the Mwangi Expanse is Paizo did a really good job of getting a diverse array of writers. And so the different cultures and groups that are inside of the Mwangi Expanse, you really get access to some unique archetypes, some unique characters, just several of the ancestries are very unique, and I love the unique story potential that comes with them. The Anati are fun, the Goloma, the like multi-eyed
Yeah,
creatures.
those things are crazy. They
Um,
they've actually got one of the weirdest ancestries to me, and I
mhm.
cannot think of the name of it at the moment, but it's like the it's the one that's living wood that's got like an orb of souls kind of deal. It's the
Konrasu.
Karasu. I was gonna
Yeah,
say Cosmera or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah, those things. I have no idea how those work. Like fundamentally.
Uh, the, the thing that throws me off with the Konrasu, and like the portion that breaks my brain, I can track with them for the most part, but one of the elements of the Konrasu is they are constantly growing because they are living wood, and so like their arms will grow out, but eventually those arms like basically stiffen up like a tree branch, and then they have to grow new arms, and so you have this creature walking around with these wooden arms at different angles, and then their primary set that's currently usable.
Yeah, that's. I don't know. Just looking at them, they're so otherworldly that I
Mm-hmm.
don't fully get how you would play as one. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there's a lot of very interesting races. That's just one that I've always kind of stayed away from, just because it's so otherworldly to me.
Mm-hmm.
They look cool, but I just I don't know, man.
Yeah, I agree that one. I almost feel like the Konrasu are a game master ancestry because like they might make for an interesting encounter for your party. But I agree with you. It would be really hard to play one out over the course of an entire campaign.
Yeah, because like just looking at it, I don't understand how they would show emotion or, for the most part, wield weapons. I
Mm-hmm.
I honestly feel like this was just Paizo putting an ancestor out there to say, "Hey, this is how weird we're gonna get this year." So when something weirder, as weird as this, comes out later, don't be shocked.
I have long said of the Starfinder books that Starfinder is where Paizo it is allowed to try all of their weird stuff, and part of me wonders if somebody from the Starfinder team snuck over and got onto the Mwangi Expanse book team for a while. But it's like I love the unique ancestries, and I even love some of the like variations on standard ancestries. Like you mentioned, the Cloudspire dwarves. One of my favorite takes is the Songo halflings from Mwangi Expanse because they're styled. I hope I'm getting this right. I think it's like off of Zulu and some of the Zulu stick fighters that, for like historically from that culture, and I just love that take because that's a very unique character concept that you don't get in other parts of the Golarion setting.
Yeah, I'm particularly I enjoy the Mwangi orcs where
Mm-hmm.
they're not known for being bloodthirsty enemies of humans, but they are fierce enemies to demons.
Mm-hmm.
Like their the rage in their blood reacts to demons instead of just everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and that just makes orcs so much more viable to be in anybody's party because you can just go, oh yeah, I'm a Mwangi at work. I
Mm-hmm.
don't get pissy around humans and stuff, and they have such a cool history though.
Mm-hmm. The I wish I had thought to look it up, but I know that the orcs come with some specific like demon hunting options for orc characters from that region. And as someone who's a fan of the World Wound, I know we're not talking about the World Wound, but as someone who's a fan of the World Wound, those options make my eyes light up.
Yeah, I was trying to navigate to their wiki page, but I can't actually remember what they're called right now.
The Matangi.
I knew I was close.
I will be honest, like, in my mind, I was like, do I want to do the Songo halflings or the Matangi orcs more? And I was having a hard time making up my mind. So I'm glad you decided to talk about them, because I felt bad when I decided to go with the halflings and left them out.
It actually looks like there's not a wiki page for them yet, which is surprising. They are very cool, though. There's just so many little differences from the orcs you're used to that makes them almost like a separate race entirely. And that's what's so cool about Paizo, is that they managed to build these entirely separate orcs in 15 or so pages, probably less than that, to be honest, because that book is packed full. Like, I've had that book a few months now, and I've still not managed to read all of it, just because there is so much lore packed into that. And if that's how Paizo is going to go forward with every single region, I'm never going to get finished.
But by the time 2E is done, my bookshelf is going to probably be falling apart, but I am okay with that.
Yeah, for real.
Okay. Well, as much as I could continue talking about the Mwangi Expanse, because it really is a region that just gets so much play at my table, I guess we should probably move on to some of the other locations on our list. So,
all right.
Are you ready to share your number 4 favorite?
My number 4 is going to be Kyonin, the homeland of the Elves on Golarion. And I've always loved elves in fiction, but I feel like Paizo puts a really cool spin on them, because they were basically around before humans were really big. The Earthfall began to happen, and the elves basically said, hey, we're going to leave the planet entirely, and we're going to go back to our true home on Castrovel. And it turns out elves aren't even from Golarion, they're from another planet. And they abandon their city. Well, over the next few centuries, a demon, or abyss demon lord by the name of Tree Raiser, would be basically cast out of the abyss. And he would land near Kyonin. And he would find out about this portal. So he would go and he would try to corrupt this portal. But he was trying to force open a gateway so he could go back to the abyss and basically lead an army against whoever cast him out. But some of the elves stayed behind as like a token force just to watch their homes and stuff and make sure humans didn't completely steal all their stuff. Well, when Tree Raiser basically walked through them like they weren't even there and started messing with this portal stone, it alerted the elves on the other side, and they came pouring back into Kyonin. And now, when you think of elves and you think of their beautiful forest homelands, they've got this basically war-torn homeland where a huge section of the forest is corrupted and burnt and swamped out from this demon lord named Tree Raiser that they're still at war with even today. And I love how they didn't just go with peace-loving elves. They went with warrior elves from another planet fighting a demon lord. And that makes Kyonin an amazing area for me.
I agree on so many fronts. I will go ahead and say that one of my favorite characters that I actually got to play in Pathfinder 1st Edition was an elven arcanist that eventually helped kill Tree Raiser. So I've got some very fond memories from that setting. But I totally agree with you. I love the idea that elves are aliens in the Pathfinder setting. That is so cool to me.
It's not just their unique spin on it. The Tanglebriar, as this swamp area is known as, it has a lot of really cool stuff. Like, there's Tree Raiser has a base that is believed to be a corrupted ent, basically, and it crawls around the Tanglebriar. and is just this massive, dozens of yards wide tree that's got elven bodies hanging from it, where he has basically made it this mobile base saying, you can attack me, but it's not going to help. And there's little bitty things, like, I can't think of the name. I should have looked this up beforehand, but there was a powerful elven mage back during Earthfall that they sought for help to stop the Earthfall, or at least lessen its impact on them. Well, he stopped responding suddenly, so they went to him and tried to see what was wrong with him. And his house is gone. There's just a huge crater where his house is, and there is about a beach ball-sized silver orb floating in the air that is just drawing trees and dirt and everything else into it that gets too close. So it seems like he was experimenting with something and basically created a black hole in the middle of his house, and it's still there. Nope. Anybody who touches it gets sucked inside of it and never comes back. But is it a demi-plane, or is it just a sphere of destruction? We don't know.
I was not familiar with that one. That is hilarious. I love that.
I'll make sure to grab the name for you, and I'll send it to you later. But yeah, that's one of those ones that I've got a lore video for Elves that has been sitting on the back burner for far too long, and I talk about it a lot more in depth there. But that was one of those little side quest kind of deals that I always thought was really fascinating that Golarion doesn't give you an answer to, so you can make your own story up.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that Paizo does so well in a lot of their settings is dropping enough hooks for stories that as a game master you're going to get excited and say, oh, I can use this, oh, I can run with this, and they do that so many times over in so many different locations that it is wonderful. My friends and I do have one joke about Kyonin, though, which is the number of things with different spellings that all seem to be pronounced Ayadara.
Yeah.
Because it's like there's gates and there's cities and there's just so many different locations where it's like, did the elves run out of words at some point?
Yeah, that's kind of an elven thing I've noticed, because like they've got the Sovereign Stone that takes them to the city of Sovereign, and there's a few things there that are pretty similar. And that's one of the reasons the elf video was hard for me, was just because I had to double check that I was saying the right word a dozen times over.
We have learned the secret weakness of the elves. If you live too long, you run out of new words. Let's see. We ready for my number 4, I guess?
We sure are.
All right. So I will admit that I really went back and forth between two different portions of the Golarion setting for my number 4, because both of these are a ton of fun. One of them is the land of the Lenorm Kings, and the other one is the realm of the Mammoth Lords. The land of the Lenorm Kings is, you could almost say, Paizo's take on like Beowulf and those style of stories. And I do enjoy that, but I ended up going with the realm of the Mammoth Lords just because getting to ride around on mammoths and other megafauna as character options, that just appeals to some portion of my brain, and I had to pick the realm of the Mammoth Lords. So the realm of the Mammoth Lords is the last traditional, or the last area where the Kellage tribes are able to live by their traditions and how they prefer to organize their society. The nation of Sarkoris, it used to be home to Kellid tribes, and the nation of Numeria used to be home to Kellid tribes, but because of the events in those two locations, those societies ultimately crumbled. But in the realm of the Mammoth Lords, the Kellids are able to maintain kind of that nomadic and tribal lifestyle that they prefer, And sometimes they travel in small tribes, sometimes they do massive groups known as followings, but essentially they move across this northern terrain, and live as hunters, and um, really and truthfully, the reason I love the Realm of the Mammoth Lord so much is it is low key Paizo hinting that you can play Journey to the Center of the Earth in Pathfinder. Um,
I will admit I don't know a lot about the realm of the Mammoth Lords. That's probably that and Kadira are probably the two nations I know the least about. Not because I'm not interested in them, but because I've been trying to learn about all the others. I do know that you've got like Sarkoris, which previously had the World Wound on one side, and then the Erison on the other side, which had Baba Yaga and her children.
mm-hmm.
So with those two on either side, it's no wonder that you've got these barbarian Kellids who are super tough living in the middle.
Oh yeah. And that plays into some of the reason that the Realm of the Mammoth Lords is a fun place to play. Is you have like the Baba Yaga style winter witches. You have those supernatural threats, and then you have the supernatural threats of like the demons that are still in the area from the World Wound. So you've got the supernatural things you get to deal with, and then you have a peculiar wealth of giant animals that live in and around this region. And the most famous one, obviously, is the mammoths that the Mammoth Lords are known for. But you also get like mega bison and aurochs, and they even note, and this might sound a little bit like my number 5, they even note the occasional strange presence of dinosaurs in this region, even though it's far north and often a cold environment. And there is a place known as the Earth Navel that is rumored to lead, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I say this right, to a place underground known as Deep Tolguth, which is supposedly where all of the great beasts of the world originally lived. And it's totally Paizo saying, hey, journey to the center of the earth here.
Yeah, Deep Tolguth is I'm willing to say it's one of the closest like surface wise parts of the Deep Dark Deep Dark. I don't feel like I'm saying that right for some reason. The of Orv, basically.
Yes.
And that really makes that a threatening place then, because you've got two hostile nations on either side and a hostile nation under them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes that whole nation a lot more intense than I was thinking.
So those are all fun, and then there are two cities in the realm of the Mammoth Lords. One of them is sort of just like a meeting ground that a lot of the tribes go to, and the other one is this random mercantile city called Istair, which is the merchant trade route that goes across the crown of the world begins at Istair. So you have mammoths and witches and demons and creatures from beneath the earth and merchant caravans randomly.
So this is up top toward the crown of the world, where it circles around to T and Shaw. Then. Okay, yeah, I really need to look more into this nation then, because this is one I have completely missed, and I feel bad about that.
It's one of those you could easily overlook, but when you dive into all of the stuff that Paizo did, when you hear the title Realm of the Mammoth Lords, that sounds like a simple setting. But when you dive into the different pieces that Paizo's put together, like, you've got 4 or 5 campaigns that you can run just in that one setting, and they would all be significantly different from one another. So, we brag on Paizo a lot, but this is another good example of them just dropping these nice little hooks in different places throughout the setting that you end up with some great stories. What is your number 3?
All right, my number 3 is going to be the Pit of Gormuz, and I hope I'm pronouncing that last part right. But basically, back during the creation times when Rovagug the Rough Beast attacked, all of the gods had to band together to be able to lock him away in this prison. And this area was where Sarenrae basically stabbed her blade and split the planet open to force him down into it. She healed the land, but didn't heal it perfectly. There's still scars, and it's a rough patch of land. So she made sure to send her angels and everything like that, followers out to say, do not live here. It is corrupted terrain. Well, they misunderstood. So they all flocked there and lived there, which is about as big of a misunderstanding as I can imagine. Well, people started getting corrupted because this was where Rovagug's very limited influence was the strongest, and he was able to influence them to be angrier and more evil aligned. And eventually, Sarenrae would send her herald down and tell them plainly, they need to move. Well, when the herald arrived, they were already so corrupted, they fell upon the herald and killed him. And Sarenrae was pissed. And she came down and drove her sword into the city that had formed there and drove it all the way down and actually scratched Rovagug's prison. And now there is this huge pit all the way down to bedrock, basically, where Rovagug's pit is. And while the prison itself is a metaphysical thing, you can't actually see metal bars. But she damaged the magic to it a little bit. And now Rovagug can force little bits of his essence out, like his blood, and form these spawns of Rovagug that come climbing out of this pit every 100, 300, 500 years. And it's now this massive pit of just demons and all the evil people who just want to destroy things, basically. And I love that as a setting. It's so intense. And it's responsible for stuff like the Tarask and the Ulanod, the Volnagar, and various other ones that have gone on to completely change the face of Golarion. And that is just like drops of blood of Rovagug, basically.
To me, it feels a little like the Rift from Pacific Rim, where massive monsters just occasionally bust through, and the world has to do everything in its desperate power to try to stop them before it's too late.
Yeah, I really like the idea that they went through all this trouble to lock him away, and then because Sarenrae got pissed, she kind of set them back a few centuries. And it's just, but in lore, it makes sense because Sarenrae's always had a hot head and blah, blah, blah. And it results in this really cool idea that I don't really know many other than Pacific Rim, like you said. I don't know very many other fictions that have something like this that I can think of. But now it's just this hotbed of orcs who are Rovagug worshippers and all the people who are disillusioned with normal life who are Rovagug worshippers, which worshippers of Rovagug are not terribly organized. They usually end up destroying themselves before they ever destroy anything else. But
we are glad they cannot plan.
Yeah, it's just this psychotic hotbed now of crazy, basically.
I definitely agree. It makes for such a great threat. It makes for such a great story. You can birth so many stories from this concept, from the fanatic followers of Rovagug to giant monsters that escape to just straight up creatures on the scale of the Tarask. And again, it's something you can build campaigns on. And then there's I had one storyteller, one of the guys who's a regular game master for our group. He absolutely loves making us go down into the Pit of Gormuz to stop some terrible monster is usually the last boss of one of his campaigns. That's
Yeah,
it.
like I feel like that's totally a valid use of it though, because you could do all kinds of stuff there. You could have it be a final boss fight. You could have it be, oh, we're going to relock the god away and have it be a big magic story or a divine story. And there's so many different things you could do there. That could that one area could be a save the world area.
All right. We ready for my number 3?
We are.
Okay, so for my number 3, I must admit, I gave my wife permission to pick one of the ones that I would be talking about on here, and I'm not surprised by her choice. Her favorite place in Golarion is the nation of Ustalav, which is Paizo's take on gothic horror. That is literally what they're going for. They even describe Ustalav as this nation that is just like perpetually shrouded in fog, that is constantly tormented by vampires and werewolves and ghouls and just all of the things you would associate with gothic horror style stories. That is Ustalav. And the history of this place, I'm not even going to try to dive into the whole history because Paizo, I feel like what most setting writers put into a typical entire setting, Paizo put into this one country. Um,
Yeah, Ustalov's one of my favorites. It's actually the only major nation I've done a lore video on so far.
mm-hmm.
So that alone lets you know that it's probably one of my favorites. But if you like Ravenloft or any kind of Call of Cthulhu type settings, this is what that is. This is Paizo's answer to all of that gothic horror settings. And I absolutely adore Ustalav.
I was going to pull out Ravenloft at one point as a comparison, and you can definitely feel kind of that classic influence. And this is a nation where it kind of feels like if anything bad can happen to this nation, it's going to.
Or it already has.
It's been under control of the Whispering Tyrant. It's been under control of the orcs. Right now, it is overwhelmed by refugees from Lastfall. Just like if something's gonna go wrong, Ustalav is where it's at.
And there's a lot of stuff there that is very cool as plot hooks. There's you've got Bastard Hall in Varna within Ustalav. It is this giant manor / castle that completely empty except for one night of each year, or 1 year of each century, sorry, where a black stagecoach comes out of it, picks up some people from nearby towns, and takes them back. And that's all we know about it. And it's actually it's a fan favorite of one of the Paizo developers, and they try to play it every year at PaizoCon. I cannot think of which developer it was at the moment, but he absolutely adores Bastard Hall. He wants it to be an entire adventure path eventually.
There are so many things in Ustalav that I would love to see turned into an adventure path. In terms of the plot hooks you get with Ustalav, you get the obvious ones. If you want to tell a vampire story, a werewolf story, the new thaumaturge iconic Mios is actually like his backstory their backstory is a werewolf story. You've got those, you've got the ghost stories, things like that. And then if you go over to Guns and Gears, Ustalav is also home to a unique type of technology, Stasian technology, or as you and I might call them, Tesla coils.
Oh, I didn't actually know about that one. That's really cool. I was pulling up some of my old Ustalav script to see if I could find a certain location I wanted to mention. I can't find it now, but I'm fairly sure this is in Ustalav somewhere. There is a manor that has been completely gutted, And when you walk in, the only thing inside this manor now is this giant egg that takes up the entire lobby. And for a long time, every like 100 years, it would slightly shake like something was moving. But in recent years, it started shaking faster. And at this point in time, it's shaking like every 10 years. And there's no other info about it. That's all you hear is that there's this egg randomly inside this giant house, and that's all they leave you with. And that's one of the few times that I'm kind of cursing Paizo for not giving us more info. I need to know what the deal with this egg is.
Paizo, if you're watching this video, just understand we need about 80 more adventure paths to cover all of the lore that you have teased us with. The last thing that I want to kind of note about Ustalav, and this is a small kind of trick of the writing of Ustalav, but I really love this as a storyteller. One of the things that they note is that Ustalav, because of everything that's happened, the people there are extremely superstitious. And they just, like, everybody has their own idea about how you ward against ghosts or how you get rid of curses, and just all this different superstition that runs around. And one of my favorite inclusions in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is the dubious knowledge skill feat, where when you fail a recall knowledge check, you get some useful information and some bad information, but you don't know which is which. And I just feel like Ustalav is the dubious knowledge skill feat capital.
I love anything that's got dubious knowledge, like you've said. I love the idea of the new class they just put out, the Thaumaturgist, because that's literally the epitome of that class. And I plan to do some reading because I'm going to try to convince my wife to DM for a little while so I can actually play for once. And I want to play a Thaumaturgist because they just seem so interesting to me. But Ustalav's always been one of my favorites. I actually did my lore videos on that nation for my wife because she was playing an Ustalav Dampire at the time.
Nice.
And I think outside the Goblin, that's probably her second favorite character.
But yes, Ustalav is Paizo's take on your Ravenloft-style stories, and to repeat what has been said a million times, Paizo has knocked it out of the park and made a fantastic location. But I guess we will move on to our number 2 pick for favorite settings. So what's your number 2?
My number 2 is going to be an area that most people don't actually like that much, from what I've seen on the internet at least. I like Numeria. It is this area of barbarians and robots, and anything basically related to those two can be found here, but people complain that it doesn't fit in Golarion. But if you look at the lore of it, it really does. Basically, shortly after Earthfall, there was like a miniature Earthfall. I think they call it Skyfall. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but a spaceship in outer space broke up over the planet and rained down in Numeria and spread their technology across the whole nation. But it didn't lead to this nation becoming this tech powerhouse. Instead, all these scared barbarians hid away for a few hundred years. And when they finally started coming out and looking at these massive wreckages, they set off basically a nuke in one of them. And the explosion was so large that it is basically an unspoken law that you do not mess with the wreckages, the ruins of these ships. And I love the contrast behind these die-hard Kelid barbarians and the unimaginable technology just feet away that they refuse to have anything to do with.
I love the contrast between those elements, And I think in second edition they've kind of done away with the Technic League, but the Technic League made for such great villains in first edition. You know, these people who are playing with this technology that they probably only understand small bits of and don't realize how dangerous what they're messing with is. But you're right; it is such a great contrast of if they only understood, and yet it's so dangerous, you know why they don't go there.
Yeah, I do believe you're right. I think the Technic League is disbanded now, but for decades, that was the exact reason you don't see laser pistols out in Cheliax or over in Nidal. It's because there was this secret group that was using magic and technology to basically make sure it never ever left Numeria.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the exact reason I find that area so fascinating, is because not only do you have barbarians versus technology, you've got a secret third group that's kind of using both to take power over both. Like, just glancing at the region, oh well, you've got the Black King, or I'm trying to think of the king there's name. He's the ruler of the area. Well, he's not really, because the Technic League have been feeding him basically this reactor fluid or something like that, and keeping him high and controllable. So they're the real threat. And if you didn't know that, you wouldn't even know about the Technic League. And even after they've disbanded officially, I could see myself still using them in a 2E group as forming a new group, or even just being an even more secretive remnants of the original group.
Oh yeah, the Technic League make for some amazing villains. I don't know if you've played the video game Pathfinder Kingmaker, but the Technic League show up as minor villains in that video game, and I always enjoy stomping them into the ground when they show up.
I have to admit, I bought the game. I had planned to live stream it on my YouTube, and just between work, putting out lore videos, and my children, I have not had time to play very many video games recently. I put most of my time into the YouTube, and that's about all the extra time I have right now.
Fair enough. Fair enough. The Kingmaker is a lot of fun. If you decide to play it, here's your warning: the difficulty will spike on you.
I am eagerly waiting Kingmaker 2E. I've never got to play the Adventure Path in the first place, and the second one comes out sometime soon, and I dearly want to play
it. As someone who has played the video game, usually I am not big on adventure paths. There are very few that I invest in, but I am seriously considering buying Kingmaker for my 2E group and possibly running that at some point, because it is a very interesting story. Not technically inside Numeria, but it's Numeria adjacent, so...
To be honest, even without playing it, I want to get my hands on the kingdom building rules that it has. Just that alone is a big draw to that system. So, I mean, I'm eagerly waiting for its release date.
Numeria is definitely a ton of fun. One of the most famous characters from Numeria that has shown up at my table. This was a little bit more lighthearted than really Paizo writes the setting, but one of the guys in my group once decided he wanted to play Mega Man, and we were using Numerian technology as the excuse for how he could play Mega Man. So
there's a particular piece of art that I always think of whenever I think of Numeria, and it shows this lone barbarian facing off against a giant, absolutely massive metal scorpion with huge machine guns at the front and a tail that's shooting some kind of plasma ball. And that right there is just such a cool image that we've done multiple one-shots within Numeria, and sometimes my group's not exactly made it through all the way just because the level of tech there is completely outside of what they're used to in Golarion.
Okay. So I'm going to take a similar approach to my number two. Numeria is sort of this. It kind of plays a little bit as this wasteland because of the starship crash and the different elements in the area. And I'm going for a little bit of a wasteland on my number two as well. But rather than being a wasteland because of technology, my number two is a wasteland because of magic. That is Alkenstar, Dungenhold, and the Mana Wastes. Basically, what this is, the Mana Waste is this thin stretch of land between the nations of Geb and Nex. And Geb and Nex are two very powerful casters who hated each other and were constantly trying to blast each other with magic and doing their best to destroy each other. And the Mana Waste is this no man's land that was between these two countries where just so much magical turmoil happened that it essentially became an area where sometimes it's dead magic, sometimes it's wild magic, but magic is no longer reliable in that area. Um, and for a long time, the area was essentially abandoned. But eventually, you have this individual who is basically on the run from the law. And so he goes out into the Mana Waste and he establishes this city known as Alkenstar, which turns out is like right next door to a secret dwarven sky citadel. And at this Dwarven Sky Citadel, Duncan Hold, they were experimenting with black powder, and so Alkenstar and Duncan Hold become kind of the black powder capital for the Golarion campaign setting. Magic is unreliable, so instead of magic, we've got gunslingers.
Yeah, I've got the Outlaws of Alkenstar Adventure Path, and that's one that my group is currently preparing to play.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been looking into a lot of Alkenstar stuff, and that is definitely it's your typical steampunk non-magical setting
Mm-hmm.
in a setting that is primarily magic, divine, and fantasy. And I love the way that that's totally believable. Oh, this is a Fallout zone where magic doesn't work. Okay, we'll substitute magic.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good example of how Paizo writes their game in a way where firearms are here, but it doesn't break the setting. You know, their explanation in Guns and Gears is, you know, firearm technology does not exist independent of magic, except in this particular area. And so, like, when firearms go out of Alkenstar, it has to contend with magic, and so that's the reason that, like, guns haven't taken over the whole world, but in this area where magic is unreliable, black powder is.
Yeah, like that's the main complaint I hear about the kitchen sink is that they've jammed everything together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't think of a single region where it's not believable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you've got your, let's see, you've got Assyrian, which is pyramids and Egypt. But then you've got Nidal, which is dark and pain-filled, and you've got Alkenstar, which is steampunk and gunpowder. But there's reasons for all of that. And that's the thing that people never really take into account when they complain about it.
One of the things that I really love about Alkenstar from a storytelling perspective, it feels like an old Western with a little bit of steampunk put on top of it. Because, like, you know, old Western movies and stories had this kind of like survival edge to them, had this, you know, like outlaws on the run or lawmakers trying to do their best to keep the city safe. You know, you get this survivalist mentality because of this magical no man's land that the people are stuck in. You know, you get that Old West vibe, and yes, you've got the cool steampunk stuff on top of it, but, you know, like, as a story, it appeals to that very, you know, gritty, like, doing your best to scratch out a living in a harsh environment, and I think it's extremely well done.
Yeah, just the intro for Outlaws of Alkenstar shows that kind of kill or be killed mentality that the area is kind of known for, and it's one that I'm eagerly waiting for.
That has taken us from number 5 to number 2, so now we're going to move on to our number 1s. But because you are the guest here, I'm going to let you save your number 1 pick for last. Let
Okay.
that be kind of the main reveal of this video. And I am going to go ahead and talk about my number 1. And I am going to leave the Inner Sea region, and I'm going to travel to a mysterious continent that is known as Sarusan. Sarusan is the smallest continent on the planet of Golarion, and that's about all that is officially known. Um, if you want to think of like location and analog to Earth, Sarusan is beneath Tian Sha, and so it would kind of fill what we would call the Australia um, block of the planet, if you will. But unlike Australia, we really don't know what is at Sarusan. It is a mystery continent, and Paizo has done this very deliberately. You can go all the way back to the earliest writings about Golarion, even before Pathfinder First Edition, and go all the way up to today. And Paizo just like stubbornly refuses to give us any details. We know that getting to Sarusan is extremely difficult. The most common way to do it is to travel through Tian Sha, through the Minata Archipelago, which is a massive journey by itself. But then, as you cross the seas, you encounter incredibly powerful storms. And from there, well, there's no records of anybody making it back. um, and so they've tossed out some rumors about what might be going on or what might be happening. You know, there's one rumor that says that if you get too close to Sarusan, when you leave, you just forget what you saw. Or there's another rumor about a fabled empire called the Empire of Tamata that was from Sarusan, and the gods smited it, and it is, you know, it's crumbled into ruins, and whatever that empire used to be has been locked behind these storms. And then there's a rumor that the serpent folk have set up an empire and have put magic or other things in place to prevent people from uncovering this location that is their seat of power. Is any of that true? Nobody knows.
Yeah, see, that's such a little. There's so little facts about that. I actually didn't know most of those rumors. I knew the one where people forget what they saw, but that's literally all I knew about that area. I didn't know there was actually more info than that.
Um, yeah, and like those are tiny pieces of information that have been dropped here or there, and they're not even real information. They're just rumored information, you know. And obviously, from the storytelling side of the equation, having that giant question mark is what Paizo did when they wrote that. You know, they wanted to put something into the setting where they're just like, here's a section of the map where you can put anything you want.
Yes, it kind of saves us the trouble of needing to spawn in a new continent for things to happen.
Mm-hmm. So, and you know, just I absolutely love that Paizo had the forethought to do that. You know, there is so much in the Golarion setting that is very detailed. You know, you can deep dive the history of Ustalav and do thousands of years of all this different stuff that's happened, and you've got all these different countries in the Inner Sea and Tian Sha, and you know, just there's tons of information out there for all the different types of stories you could want to tell. But then Paizo was like, you know what? Let's put a blank in here and say, this is your story. Do whatever you want with it.
Dealer's choice here.
Mm-hmm. So, so just because Paizo gave us that dealer's choice. That's the reason it has to be my number one. I love the respect for storytellers that Paizo shows there. Um, and I had a campaign where my players were going to actually go to Sarusan and see my version of that continent, and COVID-19 killed that campaign, so maybe my players will get there eventually. But
Yeah, I hope you get a chance to explore that.
that is my number one. So let me turn it over to you. And what is your number one favorite setting or location in Golarion?
All right. My number one is a new one. And it is mainly a new one because I have started reading the Pathfinder Tale books.
Mm-hmm.
And this book honestly shocked me at how well it fleshed out this area. But my number one is Nidal. I've started reading the Night Glass book, and in just the first 10 pages, it has done more to flesh out an area than 30% of the books I've read in my life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it starts off with this kid named Asim, and he's living in like these not exactly ramshackle huts
Mm-hmm.
on the outskirts of Nidal, but pretty crappy living. And they've got voodoo dolls hanging in all their windows, but they're facing outwards. And he asks his mother, he's like, if our Lord Zon-Kuthon watches us through the dolls, why do we have them facing outwards? And his mother responds, oh, because we're poor, stupid villagers. And if we accidentally turn the dolls to look outside of our homes, we're just making a mistake. And in just those few pages, you realize that, yeah, they live under Zon-Kuthon, but not everyone's happy about that. And openly, they follow Zon-Kuthon, but they pretend to be so stupid that they don't understand how to do it properly, when in reality, they're openly rebelling against Zon-Kuthon. A few pages later, some of the shadow callers of Kuthon's arrives in town, and one of the farmers runs up and asks if he can take their shadow steeds and feed them. And the shadow callers laugh at him and say, yeah, you can. And later, Asim asks his mom, well, why did he feed them? Those horses disappear after a few hours. And she goes, because we're just poor, stupid villagers. We couldn't possibly know that. And if we don't know that, we don't know enough to rebel. And just that, those few pages painted such a picture of this area that it hooked me in that book. And they go on to elaborate later. And there's details in these books that are nowhere in any source books I've heard of, and they are amazing details. Like, once a year, they throw a huge festival in Zon-Kuthon's honor, where they bring out the bone tables.
Mm-hmm.
And these tables are massive 30-foot long tables made entirely out of carved bones from victims, animals, anything. And these are relics of when Zon-Kuthon took Nidal as his patron nation, basically. They went out into the world after Earthfall and collected the bodies of the dead and made the first bone table in honor of him saving them. Well, 4,000 years after Earthfall, they're still doing that. Every year, they torture enough people to make a new bone table. And little details like that are crazy to me. But it's such a threatening place. Like, whenever he has to travel back to Nidal in the book, I'm literally on the edge of my seat because it's a terrifying nation.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I will admit, Nidal is one of the nations that I don't know a lot about myself, but I do. Zon-Kuthon is such an interesting take on an evil deity, and the idea of having a nation that has said, yes, we will worship you, yes, we will follow you, like, whatever that region looks like is innately terrifying.
Yeah, and it's the changes he's made to the nation that are so interesting to me. Like, originally they were horse-loving Varisians, basically. And they were nomadic and they would travel around. Well, when their fortune tellers and stuff started saying, hey, Earthfall's going to happen soon, they realized that they had nothing they could do. There was no way to save them and their horses. So the leaders of this nation began traveling around the nation searching for some way to save themselves, and they came upon a rift into the Shadow Plane where Zon-Kuthon was waiting. And he basically told them, bow down to me and I'll save everybody. And despite their advisors and everyone else saying, don't do this, they said, we have no other choice. And they did it. And he immediately just warped everything. The leaders of the nation were turned into immortal undead by the name of the Black Triune, who are still alive, running the nation behind the scenes. And basically every inch of this nation is in service to Zon-Kuthon now. Maybe not willingly, but publicly facing everything is geared toward worshiping him.
And one of the questions I was going to talk about, but I think you've already hit it with your with the Pathfinder tales that you mentioned, is what kind of stories can you use this region for? And from the description you've given, the rebellion against the Dark Overlord.
Yeah, there's a lot of little plots you could do here, like the shadows that they call, the way they describe them in the book is very imaginative too, because they don't have bodies of their own, so they have to use ours. And because this nation summons them so frequently, the whole nation is dull and gray. Like, even the trees themselves have been mostly leached of life to where you don't have colorfully barked trees with beautiful green leaves. You have dull gray lumber with bare limbs. And every single aspect of this nation has been messed with by these shadows. You've got people walking around that the shadows have consumed entirely. And when you look into their eyes, all you see is a black pool looking back at you. And they don't understand how to be alive. So they may hurt themselves too much, or they may go weeks without eating. And you've got people walking around who are on the verge of starving and are just being puppeted by shadows. All kinds of plots can happen here, let alone the various invasions they try to do into other nations once in a while. Basically, Nidal scares the hell out of me.
It is another creepy setting, but it is different in tone and different in like how you approach it from Ustalav and even from other what you might consider scary settings. And I love that Paizo gives us so many different flavors of, this is what your villains can look like. This is the different types of evil that your players might have to deal with, and that almost like draining evil of Zon-Kuthon, that's a disturbing image, and it makes for a compelling villain.
Yeah, if you were going to look at the three main evil settings in Golarion, you've got Cheliax, Nidal, and Ustalav. Each of them is completely different. In Ustalav, everyone bands together and they care about their fellow man because there's so many threats in the dark. In Nidal, you don't even trust your neighbors because you don't know if they're shadow possessed or if they are one of the true crazy followers of Zon-Kuthon. And then in Cheliax, you've got the demon worshippers who you don't know if they're just conquering the demons or if they're truly in league with the demons. And it's amazing to me that they can give you three different evils that are three completely different scenarios.
Agreed. So I think that is a pretty fun list of different places that you can use in Golarion. So for storytellers and players, if you're looking for interesting places to go, interesting places for characters to be from, interesting stories to tell, I think those are both some pretty good lists. But the time has come to turn the conversation over to the viewers and let us know what your favorite settings or location from Pathfinder, or maybe if you want to throw Starfinder in there too, you can. But let us know what your favorite locations are, and what kind of stories those locations allow you to tell. Um, Sir Vertigo, thank you again for being here and being a part of this conversation. If people wanted to find your channel, what should they look for, or where can they go?
You can go to YouTube and type in Sir Vertigo. You can search Pathfinder lore videos. A lot of my stuff is coming up under that. I've also got a Twitter and a Discord where I've got about 100-something members who like to hang out and talk about lore. And all of those can be found in the description, the about part of my YouTube channel.
All right. Well, as I said, whenever the other portion of this video goes live, there will be a link to that in the video description. And to everyone who has been part of this video and is part of that other video, thank you. Thank you again, Sir Vertigo, for being here. I've enjoyed these conversations. And
yeah, I did too. We'll definitely have to do this again. I have fun with these.
Oh, yeah. And to everyone watching, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the conversation, and have a wonderful day.